Hello, good evening again. This, I think, going to be the second part of the tonight's live stream. I really don't know what happened, but something happened and live stream just finished. So, where we will start is where we kind of stopped. What I'll do is I'll just put the video on the screen as we look at the Taliban and Afghanistan, origin of the Taliban. Can you be kind enough and then let me know if you can hear the sound, and then from that we see how we will move forward. Let me play, and then I am very much aware that what I say you will get to hear that 20 seconds after I speak, but it will be very, very helpful if you confirm the sound for me.
About 6 million women and children fled abroad while the men stayed behind to fight. The refugee kids would later be indoctrinated by Pakistani clerics and turned into the Taliban. A decade later, the Taliban youngsters would return home to fulfill their zealous goals for an Islamic state. So let's talk about the social evolution of the Taliban. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. If you like our content, hit the like button, turn on the notification bell or leave a comment. The Soviets had brought over...
Is this sound okay? Good. Sound is working, Nada, so you are fine. You just listen and stop me when you want me to pause the video. So we are looking at the origin of Taliban, and we will be watching this approximate 16 minutes video and see how it's gonna go.
Military superiority to the field. Their tanks, jets, artillery made quick work of the anti-government forces called the Mujahideen. However, regardless of how many battles the Soviets won, they were losing the fight as a whole. The Mujahideen had no central command, no unified organization to speak of, and the decentralized nature meant that there was no way to negotiate a diplomatic solution. They never engaged in pitched battles, fighting only in areas where they had the tactical advantage. The guerrilla fighters could therefore strike at will and retreat into the mountains. Soviet tanks and armored vehicles could not pursue into the elevated areas because the passages were uncharted. Even Soviet jets were ineffective because the Mujahideen used the flight patterns of birds as an early warning system. Whenever a large group of birds took flight, the guerrilla fighters knew something was up and took shelter beforehand. The Soviets were fighting ghosts, and in most encounters they found themselves outmaneuvered. In the early phase of the conflict, the Soviet army was mostly shooting at rocks and dirt. In this type of combat, nearly all of the Soviet weaponry was useless, all but one, the Mil-24 gunship. Its thick armor could withstand a barrage of small arms while it hovered over the air like an angel and took down enemy combatants with its large rotary cannon. However, once the Americans supplied the Mujahideen with Stinger surface-to-air missiles, it was game over. The economics was set. A Stinger cost less than $40,000 to produce.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say, for right now, what we're watching, or we've just seen, for everybody who's not aware, this is during the Soviet-Afghan conflict, right? And this is when you had this is the big formation of these different groups that all of a sudden they were split. So it wasn't centralized. It was like these Mujahideen, different guerrilla groups, militia groups. They weren't all unified together. They weren't centralized. They were just various factions, different, whether they herders, like farmers, rural workers, things like that. And so this is when they all of a sudden are starting to form, and they're obviously against. Now, this Soviet occupation, right, that came in, this is also something that, yes, at the same time, while you had, many parts of the nation that were opposed to them coming in, there were obviously some that were not, right, that were actually in cahoots, if you will, with them. And they so you'll see more about that now, but how they even came about to even come in there. So there's obviously people that were opposed to this. This is a very precarious time for Afghanistan. I mean, we're talking about you have like you have a monarchy, you have a Shah, right, ruling the country, and then at the same time he has his cousin who becomes like the prime minister, and that prime minister becomes aligned with the Soviets, who very famously said, "I want to smoke American cigarettes and light them with a Soviet lighter or a Soviet match." Like he wanted the best of all these worlds, and that was his. Eventually, he ends up taking him down and deposing him. But in the meantime, it's a very like precarious time. It's a very weird time. So this is what's going on, and then there's people that are the Mujahideen, that are these groups that are opposed to this invasion. They're opposed to this influence from the Soviets, and that's where these groups are formed from. Okay, you can continue now. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you, sister.
Griffin, from the Armchair Historian, made a video on that very subject.
Hi Shervan, if you want to see how these weapons were later turned on the Americans, head over to my video on the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan, which you can find on the Armchair Historian channel.
Thanks, Griffin. By 1985, the Soviet leadership understood that the war effort was unsustainable. Yet, as difficult it was to fight the Mujahideen with their new weapons, it was even harder to identify them since they looked like other Afghans from the countryside. And most of the Mujahideen troops were just farmers and peasants. Whenever they weren't fighting the Soviets, they were plowing their fields, arranging marriages, and going about their daily lives. Sensing their strategic dilemma, Soviet military thinkers came up with a radical new doctrine. Since the guerrilla fighters and the Afghans from the countryside were indistinguishable, both were to be treated as enemy combatants. A plan of mass exodus was devised by none other than Nobel Peace Prize winner Mikhail Gorbachev. In the preceding years, countless villages were bombed, industrial sites were shut down, livestock was gunned down from the air, landmines were scattered over farmlands, and so on. Many of these landmines are still there, making arable land a precious resource. In just the first year of this deadly new doctrine, over 1 million Afghans died. Perhaps the most cruelest tactic was the Soviet toy mine. It was specifically designed to attract children, but it was only strong enough to maim them. The science behind this was that injured families would not be capable of putting up further resistance. It was that kind of a war. The ultimate objective was to force the rural population into the urban areas, which the Soviets did control. Kabul's population nearly tripled, but most Afghans, more than 6 million, fled their homeland to neighboring Pakistan and Iran. Children made up a disproportionate bulk of the refugees. Remember these kids, because one day they will return. The refugees, however, were not whole families. Women, children, and elderly people left their homes while the men stayed behind to defend it. Whoever was of fighting age was given a rifle and pointed towards the direction of the foreign enemy. Now, Afghans were familiar with combat, but this level of genocidal warfare was nothing they had seen before. For Afghans, this was no longer a war against a foreign invasion, but a fight for survival. As families were torn apart, Afghanistan became a land absent of women and children. This was a significant turning point. As patriarchal as Afghan culture is, family ties tempered the macho behavior. Men were tough, but they would also intuitively display signs of pride, affection, generosity, and protection. Disconnected from their families for years, the Afghan fighters became emotionally disturbed. Most of the Mujahideen guerrilla fighters found themselves stuck in the sole company of other adult.
Okay, we
Okay,
pause
sorry.
here for
Yeah, I
a
just
second.
wanted to let you know. Yeah, so I'm right now. I wanted to go over the fact, I mean, obviously you heard that part. They said, remember these kids. So remember those kids. Those are the ones I talked in the last live stream, part 1, if you will. That's where I highlighted how there are these kids that were displaced during this conflict, and well, some went to Iran, but the majority went to Pakistan. And it'll show you how these are not. This is why I want to point out the Taliban they are not foreign invaders. You know, they are Afghans. They are Pashtun. This is their area. This is their region. But what I wanted to point out here is the how things came back to bite, because the U.S. was, you know, providing weaponry for these mujahideen, and they obviously ended up, you know, that ended up coming back in the face later on, because now they were full of artillery, and this was mainly facilitated by the CIA at the time. But this was an effort that they found to be a compelling effort, because they were fighting against the Soviets, communism. And so that's why it's such a mess. And I just want to say, many people say they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires, right? I don't call it that. I call it the mother of vicious cycles, because that's what Afghanistan very much is. So so I basically just wanted people to focus now on the point where they're saying how there's a separation. Now think about that society where you have Sharia that's really suppressing the involvement of women within the society. And at the same time, you know, it's showing you the negative effects of separating the men from their families and what effect that has on them, right? And how they're going to be distant from the idea and the horrific things. I mean, this is unfortunately the reason why things like the Bachabazi boys that even exists in Afghanistan, which is the most horrific thing, really soul ripping, that entire involvement. But those are the type of things that come out of this sort of dehumanization, war mentality, survivalist mentality. You get very savage, and those are the effects of these conflicts and war. So I just wanted to point that out for people to focus on. We can continue now if you like, sister.
Yeah, and so that was a question on who supplies those guns to those farmers. You answered that as US and you answered that as USA, and also there was a comment on remember these children. So as we move forward the video, I do hope that you will keep ears and eyes on that. So let's continue.
In some of the harshest conditions imaginable. War can change men, and in Afghanistan, it changed millions. In Pakistan, in the city of Peshawar, ethnic Pashtuns organized fundraisers, collected weapons, and recruited volunteers to fight alongside their kin in Afghanistan. Soon enough, more than 80 factions emerged, all claiming to be fighting for a holy cause. The Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI for short, took hold of the situation. Prior to this, the ISI had been a relative small player in Pakistani politics, but with the massive resources coming in from the United States and Saudi Arabia to fund the Afghan war effort, the ISI quickly rose to the top of Pakistan's political food chain. The ISI distributed money, weapons, and volunteer fighters to its favorite Pakistani-based groups, which then sent these across the border into Afghanistan. Each of the Pakistani groups claimed the mantle of leadership, and each tried to prove their devotion to the Afghan cause by taking more radical Islamic narratives. As the war in Afghanistan dragged on, the Pakistani groups took on increasingly zealous attitudes, one more extreme than the other, until extremism was the new normal for the Afghan mujahideen. By 1988, the Soviet war machine could bear no more and retreated. They abandoned their Afghan communist allies to the wolves. The government in Kabul desperately tried to reach a peace deal, but it was to no avail. Too much blood had been spilled, and without Soviet support, the Kabul government had no leverage for negotiations. There was still enough Soviet military hardware to hold out a fight, but in 1992, things eventually fell apart. The Mujahideen forces enclosed on Kabul and overthrew the communist leadership. However, once in Kabul, the Mujahideen groups came to blows with one another. They started occupying different parts of the city and fired thousands of rockets on each other. The carnage ripped Kabul apart. Half of the city was reduced to rubble. A similar fate took hold in the other cities, where competing Mujahideen forces turned their rifles against one another and fought to solidify their holdings. Essentially, what the Soviets did to the countryside, the Afghans did to their cities. And soon enough, chaos engulfed Afghanistan as many sovereign domains emerged all across the country, all of which erected checkpoints on what remained of the roads. Remember those kids we mentioned earlier who fled their homes due to the Soviet depopulation strategy?
Okay, so like,
Yes, sister.
yeah, so I wanted to pause because this is the point where I'm talking about. This is where we're going to lead up to remembering those kids. So also, as they just highlighted in the report, just highlighted that obviously you have a situation where this is why it's so difficult to bring Afghanistan on the same page. Usually a country needs at least 50% to be on the same page, and then you can have different factions that have differing views and outlooks, even ideologically. But the reason why this is happening there is that you had, because of the war, you had these different groups, these different Mujahideen militia groups that formed. And this is where you start to get this compartmentalization where they're separate and they start to set up checkpoints, and you start to get this really deep, starts to go beyond just survival. It starts to go into corruption. It starts to go into checkpoints and demanding this money. Then they start to make different deals. This is one of the reasons why there are people in Afghanistan that welcome the Taliban, not necessarily for their hardline Sharia, but because they're kind of like the centralized sort of wardens of checkpoints and things like that. And so when they came in recent times now, you had all this corruption, yeah, including some Afghan soldiers, definitely different militia groups that are really residual from this time period here, and still, asking for their own jizyas, if you will, if you want to get through here, if you want to do this. And so when you have the Taliban come in, that eliminates all these confusing, multi-layered groups down to one. So it's kind of like manageable terrorism is basically where we're at right now. But right now we're going to watch where those displaced youth, the boys and the youth, and how they came to formulate themselves as the Taliban known today. Okay, thank you, sister.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the years had not been kind to them. Growing up in refugee camps is no childhood. Most of these kids had no father figures, and all they knew was poverty. A whole generation of Afghan kids grew up in these camps. There was only one way to escape: Pakistani madrasas. These were religious schools that provided free education. It gave the kids some sense of normality, routine, and something they could look forward to. The schools were run by clerics who answered to the Islamist parties in Pakistan and were closely connected to the ISI, while their funding mostly came from the wealthy Saudi families. More than 2,000 such madrasas operated in Pakistan by the Afghan border, and an estimated 220,000 children enrolled in these schools. Now, you can see where this is going. The refugee kids were virtually cut off from the world news and were indoctrinated into the Wahhabi faith. The students were made to believe that they were destined to rescue the world from evil, and evil constituted anything that was not familiar to them. Many of these madrasas also taught combat skills in addition to religion, so their students could go and fulfill the apocalyptic narrative. These students became the Taliban. The word Taliban is the plural word for student in Arabic. In the Afghan city of Kandahar, a Taliban cleric by the name of Mullah Omar had led a group of youngsters to take over some districts from other Mujahideen groups. For the locals, this was a welcome change. Many of the smaller Mujahideen groups had turned to extortion, harassment, and persecution. With the Taliban youngsters, however, rapists were hung, thieves lost limbs, and other criminals were dealt with accordingly. At the time, for many Afghans, the Taliban may have seemed like bringers of stability when compared to the old Mujahideen. The events in Kandahar caught the eye of the Pakistani security apparatus, and soon enough, the ISI provided the up-and-coming Taliban with arms, funding, and additional training. By 1994, the Taliban took out the Mujahideen checkpoints by the Afghan-Pakistani border, allowing for goods to reach the Afghan markets. Prices were lowered too, since there were no more tolls. Next, the Taliban completely took over Kandahar and came in possession of artillery, tanks, helicopters, radio equipment, and not to mention hundreds of truckloads of guns, ammunition, and money. Meanwhile, across the border, Pakistan opened the gates of the Afghan refugee camps, allowing the Taliban students to pour into Afghanistan. Initially, Afghans welcomed the Taliban because civilians lived under the fearful eye of the Mujahideen thugs. Afghans were desperate for a savior, and the Taliban fulfilled that role. Following Kandahar, the Taliban drove out the Mujahideen from cities such as Ghazni, Wardak, Logar, and others. By 1995, they took the city of Herat and were headed towards the capital Kabul. In late September 1996, residents of Kabul found their streets being patrolled by young men with black turbans. The Taliban looked as foreign as the Russians. They spoke a different dialect, were educated in a faraway land, and descended from the refugee families from the mid-1980s. As soon as the Taliban settled into the seat of power, reality sunk in. Women were henceforth forbidden to take part in the public life, thieves would lose limbs, music, films, and even photos were banned, theaters were turned into mosques, video stores were burnt down, and TV sets were smashed. Gambling was outlawed, pets were forbidden, the celebration of non-Islamic festivities was criminalized, and even traditional Afghan customs, such as kite flying, was prohibited. Every man and woman had to wear clothing according to the mandates of Sharia, beards became mandatory to men, and anyone caught not praying at designated times would be punished. Afghanistan became a totalitarian state. Much of the world turned a blind eye to the activities of the Taliban, mostly because the events in Eastern Europe took precedence. American policymakers knew little about the Taliban, and many believed that they would eventually evolve into a state much like Saudi Arabia. As far as the White House was concerned, it was business as usual. This sentiment quickly changed in 1998 when a French Arab-Afghan Mujahideen group called Al-Qaeda declared war against the United States. US lawmakers were caught off guard and asked their Pakistani counterparts to look into the situation. By this time, however, the Pakistanis had lost their influence over the Taliban. In fact,
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is where we're going to understand where the connection between Al Qaeda and the Taliban starts to come in place. So obviously, the Taliban is now formidable, and they're running the show in Afghanistan. And also, they come back in, and there's good things that they're bringing in the eyes of some of the Afghans. But at the same point in time, because like I said, they're native to Afghanistan. They are Afghans, of course, primarily Pashtun. But at the same point in time, that's their homeland. But they from youth. So think about that. So from little boys, and they're brought into this mindset, and they're trained and to think like this is the only way to avoid something like this from happening to another generation, or all of them being displaced. And this is because this is what they need to do. So when they go back, they miss like over a decade. So we're talking about a decade that they've lost of the sort of Afghan spirit, if you will. They're the zeitgeist of the Afghans. They're on the outside of that, and they come in and they want to enact order again according to Sharia, and they do. And at the same time, while there's many that are very opposed to a lot of the things that they're enacting, primarily the upper echelon and the different groups that are more of the middle class, upper middle class, and beyond, you also have many people that are like, okay, now we finally have someone in here to enact some sort of law and order, because it was like the Wild West for a long time, and much worse actually. So that's where we're at now. So but the thing I want people to take away from is to understand the psychology, the mentality of this. You know, being a little kid, you know, you see your country is being torn apart. You have to go be a refugee. You are without, you know, we're persona non grata. You have no nation. You have no country. You have your homeland, but you can't go there. And then you're given a tool, right? A tool through the madrasas of a way to fill your belly, and also an ideology that's going to put things back on course. And what better way to cloak that than making you think that this is the best thing you could possibly do, right? Because it's for quote unquote Allah, for God. In their mindset, this is if you bring back law and order, this is what you'll be bringing forward. And so it's not just as simple as this is not your typical where you have in other areas they just want to take over, invade, control, and expand. They want to go back into their own nation, their own native land, and they want to bring it back together, but they want to bring it back to a proper place, right? Because they feel like, because they lost their way, if you will, that's why these things came about. And so that's their mindset. And so now they're standing sort of they're like at a precipice, like what are they going to do? And people start to sign on, and there's so much corruption from the poppy fields, from different areas. It's just like a complete disconnect between one group to another, and it just brought order. It brought order because you had so many individual militias, you know, commanding their own rule. You just didn't know. You would be sitting there, and one day another group would come in and attack you, or, you know, take your stuff or whatever. Then another one. And then when you had one centralized enforcer, it became more manageable for them. And that's the main reason why. Okay, you can continue.
Thank you.
It turned out that the Taliban's promotion of Pashtun chauvinism endangered the territorial integrity of Pakistan itself. The political architects of the ISI had failed to anticipate this social evolution. Moreover, many of the lower-ranking ISI agents had worked for years with their Taliban partners and had grown personal sympathies. In practice, these ISI agents were as much as Pakistani patriots as they were members of the Taliban. The Pakistani leadership recognized that they had created a monster. The infection of Talibanism had already affected the lower ranks of the ISI, and the government in Islamabad refrained from taking any action against the Taliban for fear that the lower ISI agents would disobey the orders, possibly even committing a coup. This turn of events granted the Taliban a free hand, and Talibanism, or Pashtun chauvinism, overran the entirety of the Afghan-Pakistan border. The Taliban could now do whatever it pleased. The rival Mujahideen leaders were assassinated, the 6th century Buddha statues of Bamyan were destroyed, and Mullah Omar of the Taliban delivered a stark warning to the Prime Minister of Pakistan that he could either enforce Sharia or deal with the instability. Concerning the Taliban, all bets were off, and that would become even clearer following the attack on September 11, for Afghanistan would once again be in the spotlight. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Remember to hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, or leave a comment for the algorithm. Thank you for watching, and Saul.
That was the end of the video, Nada.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so that brings you to just understanding. My main objective was for people to understand where the Taliban comes from, what their real what their roots are, and that they're not your typical idea. I mean, their roots or the reason for their formation is not your typical reason. I mean, there is a lot of, oftentimes it's the disenfranchised that are targeted to join these sort of groups. So this was a different sort of effort, and this is the reason why. This is the reason why you'll actually find even when you go there, it's a different situation. It's easy to talk from afar and to have, armchair, opinions. But that's why you even have commanders from the US, and of course as well as the UK, and recently has been has brought to the forefront saying that they do that the Taliban has a and I got a lot of flack, and that the Taliban has a code of has like a certain code of honor that they live by. It's not the one that we would adhere to, but it is there, and they do adhere to it. And as crazy and insane and horrific and brutal as they are in the minds of many Afghans, at the very least, the lesser of the evils.
So just kind of watching this video, and I'm very grateful, like someone just like summarized everything and then put them on the timeline. When it brings me today, for example, I think around 3 o'clock or something, there was like bombing in Afghanistan and people died. And last couple of since last week, people are running away for their life to have a better life, or running away from Taliban, which is as it's been stated that their school is madrasas, where they are studying Islam, where they are studying the teachings of Islam, Quran and Muhammad. So that like all very much concern for people who live in that land. There is a huge concern for Muslims, as well as a Christian. We do have lots of concerns for our brothers and sisters. I was talking with brothers today. Afghanistan is the second fastest growing country when it comes to church. Second fastest growing country when it comes to church. First one is Iran, second one is Afghanistan. And now Taliban is there leading it, and identifying people of the book, and even identifying like young girls to take them to themselves. What is your all over intake, and what do you see like next couple of months will look like for my main focus question is mainly for Christians.
I think that it will mainly be a complete retreat and secrecy, like the ones that survive. Christians in Afghanistan have been a vast minority throughout history, but now, as there is definitely growth, but it's still pretty nominal by comparison. But they've mostly learned to keep to themselves, right? And so they will definitely have to go even more so underground, for sheer survival, because obviously this will not be tolerated. This will obviously end in a situation, I think, like it was the last time that the Taliban ruled in the 90s. This actually happened to the Hindus in Afghanistan. They were forced to wear, obviously the full burqa and everything like that, but on top of it, the men and women and children had to wear yellow badges, as we know is very kin to Islam. So they had to wear yellow badges and marking themselves. And so I think that this could very well happen to the Christians.
So I was speaking with some brothers over there, and apparently their names already in the list of Taliban, with their locations.
Yeah.
Soon after 31st of August, things are going to be very different. And yes, number of Christians very small over there, but it is like second fastest grown church in the world, Afghanistan. So like there is a huge growth. Even the number might be small, but still there is like a huge growth there. So their name is in the list of Taliban, as well as names of all the foreigners. So soon after the 31st of August comes, things will look very much different. And it is amazing how much people love the Lord. It's their home, and people don't. Most of Christians don't want to leave their homeland, so they are willing to stay there. And their prayer is that Lord use this for them to preach our glorious gospel to the those individuals who are right now doesn't have that much love towards Taliban.
Yeah, indeed.
There were a couple of questions in the chat. Mainly was
But can I just add one quick thing? Just
yeah.
now, when you mentioned about the identity, really quick. Obviously, most people have heard about all the weapons and everything like that the U.S. has left behind, quote unquote, left behind. Obviously, there's some speculation that this is part of the deal, particularly with the CIA, to be left. And then at the same time, I do believe that this was left for the Afghan army, for the officials. But obviously, in the course of this, there's wheeling and dealing always going on. And so I don't think that there's any surprise or shock to U.S. intelligence that this would end up in the hands of the Taliban if it wasn't necessary, if it wasn't actually part of the deal in many ways. So you have that. But another part that you have that's there is you have the biometrics technology. And what this means is more than a list. This is a system that was left behind, which was the most devastating thing, in my opinion, even compared to the weaponry, which is insane. The amount of weapons that were left behind, artillery, different technologies, but the actual biometrics technology is the most dangerous, because this is not just the biometrics of the Christians, but obviously also any group that's ever worked in tangent, been any loyalist to the Afghan army, the Afghan army themselves, interpreters. I mean, I'm just like, the list goes on. And so this is why the bending of the knee was so quick as well, because they know that they're on the list. But the thing is, with the Taliban, they don't care. You can comply, but most of them just got the hell out of there. That's what they did. They were like, we got to go. Whether it's the Afghan military, there are obviously some members of the Afghan military that were like, no way, I'm not leaving my station. I'm not going to put down my weapons. And this is why the Northern Alliance, or now the Northern Front, Resistance Front, is gaining some speed in the Panjshir Valley. But at the same point in time, can you understand the magnitude of the fact that they have the list? I mean, talk about, this will, by comparison, Nazi Germany is like a drop in the bucket compared to what is slated to ensue here. That they have the name, the list, the biometrics, all they have to do, they have all the technology. Give them a scan, there you go. Live or die, they control, they own them. They own the people that were linked towards being against the anti-Taliban, or anybody that's against the Taliban system. They have them on a list, okay? And this is horrifying. And again, like last time the Taliban came in, and those that were, the president that was aligned with, the Soviets, or they believe that the Soviet puppet, obviously it's always a puppet. Then they see Ashraf Ghani as a U.S. puppet, as I could definitely agree with that myself. But what they did to that last one is that they hung him, and they completely, like, they cut him up in a very brutal fashion, killed him, and then hung him on a tree. So if you're sitting there and now you're the one in charge, you know that you're going to go down the ship. I mean, I can't say that I'm at all surprised that Ashraf Ghani took off, to be honest with you.
How did they left those biometrics behind? Like, Like
Like
I don't know,
you would think,
when there is when
act,
there's a fire or something, basic thing, you know, is like you just leave, and then only thing I will take is Bible or something. So like essential, you take it with you. So like how come they kind of forget it, or
yeah, I highly doubt it. I believe that that was part of some sort of a back deal. I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint right now. Obviously, is it? It's really speculation, but I think it's lofty speculation because obviously there's deals. As soon as you have something like the Doha Agreement even in existence, you know that there's space for this kind of stuff. But it could also be people, because it was supposed to be like the weaponry. Now, just to be very clear, it's not uncommon, and this also happened during the Soviet occupation, where they left, a large majority of their weaponry, artillery, and different stuff like that. And mainly it's because you can't grab it all at once, and also a lot of it is very expensive to transport. And for instance, now in this situation, obviously there's parts, I think, is part of a deal. Obviously, this all goes onto their bazaars and markets and gets sold. But it was supposed to be left, for instance, supposedly for the Afghan army. I can't really see that being a clear plan. I think it was kind of like whatever, a lot of shoulder shrugging. I think that there was some resentment from the West, particularly the US, towards the Afghan government for not being more centralized, even though they're supposed to be the centralized faction. Even there was some resentment that there wasn't this unity, this clear. But with the Taliban, they could negotiate because they know exactly what they want. Whereas with the Afghan government, they didn't. Now, when it comes to the biometrics, obviously, I can see the weapons, I can see the Humvees and stuff like that. Yeah, to transport those into a different area across the Atlantic, to go through that entire process to get it there can be very costly. And so it's not uncommon for the weapons, certain large things like that, to be left behind. That's what people need to understand. This is not the first time. Same thing happened in Iraq and stuff like that. You leave it behind. Definitely par for the course. But the fact that the biometrics is not so costly to transport, it's not this gigantic Humvee. It's not a Black Hawk. Okay, it's not a big. It's something that would have been much easier to transport and get out of there. And the fact that that wasn't secured, that it wasn't secured, let's say by the West, that they didn't say, okay, we need to grab this and take it with us. Let's say they want to leave it for the Afghan. The fact that the Afghan government didn't say, let's grab and put that aside, it gives me clear indications that there was definitely some wheeling and dealing, and that this was somehow part of the deal.
and how do you see life of, like Taliban expressed that they will give right to the woman in the limit of Sharia. How do you see life of woman would look like under the Sharia, with the improved version of this Taliban too, as well as if you are able to, can you also comment on the life of Christians as well?
Yeah, so the life under the Sharia will be pretty brutal for the Christians. That's why, like I said before, they're going to have to go way underground and be in complete compliance. And it won't be surprising if they have to work with them in some way, not aid them in their terrorism, but comply and be like, okay, we agree to take care of this and this and this for you in order to survive, because otherwise they're dead. I can see very much so it being a situation where the Christians in particular will end up being like the Hindus were during their last reign, where they'll have to wear some sort of marker, a yellow badge, some kind of something to markate them. As far as for women, in this regard, there are many women in Afghanistan that do wear the hijab. They do these things. This is part of their life. This is the way they are. Then you have another smaller faction that has a different, more westernized mindset of living and everything else. But for the most part, we have to keep in mind that in Afghanistan, you have like over half the population that is illiterate. Okay. So this is, and also you have over half the population that doesn't have access to this sort of information, to the world, social media, television. This is not part of their life. There's some of them that have never even been to Kabul. They have no idea what's going on over there. They're living in the rural areas, and they're very disconnected from what's going on in the urban areas and the cities and the major cities. So I think that another thing people need to understand is people are very quick to comply. So a lot of times you'll see stuff like that, like the covering of different like banners that had like women's hair salons, and yeah, there are some instances where it was the Taliban that covered something up, but primarily you had people taking a proactive stance, okay, shop owners, people in the city doing that themselves, not the Taliban. But they were like, uh-oh, let's get rid of this. They're not going to like this. Or ones that don't like it themselves are not the Taliban, but they're like, great, now we can get rid of this, or take her red lipstick and cover it up in something gray because this is, they disagree with this. So
Um,
oh, and also one more thing I just wanted to say, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to make it clear that this unfortunately this terrorist attack, okay, from ISIS, and while Al Qaeda has gotten historically got protection and got the ability to expand, and there's well over 500 members of Al Qaeda in the Taliban right now, or at all times there was, in Afghanistan. Um, they're not like bosom buddies, like so completely connected, but they are definitely connected. They have definitely worked together, and they're coming to some agreement with the Al Qaeda, which is, I guess, what the U.S. is counting on. Now ISIS, now that's expand, which obviously ISIS is an evolution off of an offshoot off of Al Qaeda, but now you have ISIS-K, and this ISIS-K is actually a staunch enemy of the Taliban, and they are definitely in opposition. So now, when you see ISIS-K doing these, this regional ISIS doing these terror attacks, like two of these suicide bombings happening, this is now going to, unfortunately, only solidify the importance and validate the Taliban as a governing body for many Afghans, unfortunately, because they're not going to see this happening like, oh, this is because the Taliban came in. They're going to see this as like, you see, we knew this was going to happen. It's only a matter of time before this other organization or other ones or ISIS-K, other terrorists. So they don't see the Taliban, many of them, the majority, as the terrorists. But they do see things like ISIS, other groups, as being terroristic, and some do see, the West and the U.S. as being obviously occupiers, terrorists, ones that put in, puppet governments. So they see them as terroristic, and we always have to remember that one man's hero is another man's terrorist, or one man's terrorist is another man's hero. So they definitely don't see this as something like, oh, now this is the reason why the Taliban has to get out of here. You will see a small faction saying, if this didn't happen, this wouldn't have happened, but in most estimations, this is only going to solidify the rule of the Taliban.
so someone is saying, take out all the Christians and other religions people from Afghanistan, then just ignore Afghanistan and forget about it. How much we will care for them? The Taliban will be that much harder on them. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know about that, because right now I understand that thinking, but at the same point in time, like you said before, sister, that there's people there that like they don't want to leave. They want to stay there. For instance, the Christians, because they want to, and they're extremely brave and really, true lovers of Christ, because they want to stay there at whatever cost, and they want to be there and be able to share the gospel with people in the area. And if they're not there, then Christianity, any semblance of Christianity, dies within Afghanistan. So they're willing to sacrifice themselves. And so I don't think it's just as simple as remove them from the area. At the same point in time, when you're talking about, okay, so now this is going to be hard on the Taliban, I don't know about that, because you have Pakistan that is very like backhand, behind the scenes helpful for their own use. You have some factions that are not very fond of the Taliban. Then you have some that are. There's like this ebbs and flow, love-hate relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan. And right now, Pakistan is doing all right because obviously Afghanistan is on par to go into massive starvation and devastation in the coming months, especially with the winter season when that comes. And so now you have Pakistan that before the Taliban, now during this initial takeover, whatever, I guess you would say the straw that broke the camel's back in the recent week. Their trucks and their importing of goods went down to like a handful of trucks, but now they're back up in tandem with the Taliban. They're back up to 400 trucks come in to Afghanistan through acceptance of the Taliban from Pakistan. They're bringing in like goods. They're bringing in all sorts of materials. So the issue right now is you're going to get like the humanitarian effort, which I understand is going to put in. This is where things happen. These are things where things actually get solidified. So like the Taliban, obviously, the U.S. being the global currency standard currency, has with their reserve is holding their money, right? They're not allowing the Taliban to access it. Then you have the International Money Fund also doing the same thing. But eventually you're going to have the Taliban making these pleas to the global community about please unfreeze our funds so that we can feed our people. And this is where it goes next level. This is where the entire issue that we're dealing with here, many people have missed this, okay? And they're saying this is the reason, that's a problem. There are so many problems, so I can see why. But the biggest issue when you really pan out and look at it is that even though the U.S. has certainly, or the West or different nations have certainly negotiated with terrorists, regardless of what the rhetoric or little catchphrases happen to be, they certainly have. And they've also, obviously, as we know, have installed puppet governments. Myself being Serbian, I know with Kosovo, you have Al-Qaeda trained government that took over the current occupation of Kosovo, that area. Where you have like obviously where they pushed out all the Christians, out of that area. And so obviously, definitely want to go on record as saying Kosovo is very much Serbia. And I'll tell you about that connection later on and how that's going to affect everyone. But on the broader scale, you're looking at a situation where now what's happened here is that this is now we're living in this very global digital age. So unlike other times where people didn't see, okay, all the details or the younger generation didn't really know, now you have everything at the forefront. And now this is like the first time that on a global scale, with all eyes watching, that you see the U.S., okay, validate and actually validate and directly and indirectly allow a terrorist organization that they've been pumping into the airwaves, into all media propaganda, terrorists, even though, like I said on the last stream, part 1, that they're actually technically not defined as a terrorist organization collectively. Individuals are, but collectively the Taliban is not defined as a terrorist organization. But this has been funneled that way. So now the U.S. has very clearly shown that that now they have legalized terrorism is basically what happened. We have legalized terrorism. So now they've legitimized terrorist organizations to take over a government. So what's going to stop in the future other terrorist organizations around the world, other jihadis from taking over? What's going to stop Boko Haram from saying we're legit? Well, what they did now is huge for like the jihadists, for these different terrorist organizations around the world. What they've done is they've now validated and they've shown them a way, a very pragmatic like step 1, step 2, a process of saying this is how you can take over your area and be legitimized, and you can use us. Now the U.S. is unfortunately not individual soldiers, of course, or individuals, but U.S. collectively led by Biden has now allowed legalized terrorism, validated them to become the wardens and the governors of a state. And this is very dangerous globally. And that's why now the next step is how they're going to end up going in. You're going to have terrorists definitely funnel, because you're going to have so many refugees that are genuinely in need. A lot of good Afghan people that need help, okay? But of course you're going to have in there mixed in a good faction of terrorists. And this is for Al-Qaeda. This is not so much the Taliban that wants to funnel. This is Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda, of course, will go to Albania, which is like the Muslim country in Europe that has occupied a portion of Serbia, of Kosovo. So you have that, and they're turning this into like a terror cell state. And they, of course, with open arms are welcoming, thousands of them to come in. And where do they go after that? They're not going to stay there. They're going to go straight into the rest of the West, as they usually do, like 2015 all over again. So this is the danger. This is legalized terrorism on a global scale. This is a problem.
Thank you very much for that, sister. I'll just want to add something to the comment regarding take out all the Christians and other religions people from Afghanistan. It is their home. That's where they born, that's where they grown up, and for our brothers and sisters, that's where they met with our crucified and risen Lord. It is not simply take them out. And our brothers and sisters prayerfully considered and decided Afghanistan is their home and they want to stay in their home. It's helpful for us to remember when we look at the church history, persecution caused church to grow. Iran, one of the most dangerous country to be Christian, one of them, is church is growing. Afghanistan is second country where church is like growing amazingly. So simply stating, let's take them out and then put them in somewhere else, let them to start new life. I'm not sure if that is prayerfully considered respond. But like I am very much aware that our brothers and sisters prayerfully considered and they decided maybe persecution might come, but Lord Jesus Christ is worthy for me to be here and take this opportunity to preach our glorious gospel. Like in my conversation with them today, like brothers were praying that Lord will use this opportunity to preach the gospel, help them to witness. They have to relocate from places to place. Their life is changing disturbingly. But at the end, we cannot simply tell someone, oh, persecution is coming and life is going to be hard. Therefore, move out and give everything. Eternal Son of Father knew the consequences of his life on earth. He knew what it meant for him to become God-man. He knew what cross is going to look like, yet he still gave himself for us. And our brothers and sisters think that Jesus is worthy for them to be there. Jesus is worthy for them to take the opportunity and preach the gospel. Of course, they will be acting more wisely now. Like, for example, every house who has got girl over 12 needs to put the sign of X on their door. If you haven't done that, you will get killed. So they have to follow certain structures. You've got sign of Nun on the doors, which already your name is known by Taliban as you are Christian. So they have to kind of act wisely, but they are willing to stay there, and they are hoping and praying that Lord will give them opportunity while the changing is taking place in the country, while people are running away from Taliban. It is a great opportunity for them to fill the gap and then give people alternative of Lord Jesus Christ. People who are living in the hills, on the caves, in the mountains, it's not that simple for them to give up everything. They never seen anything different, like asking someone to give up their home, even home country, and move to a different country, learn new language, start a new life, is very, very different. And I think as a Christian, it will be helpful if we are praying for their faithfulness in those situations of persecution. And I think we all kind of observe, or maybe some of us went through persecution, that persecution is also time for people to focus their eyes and hearts on Lord Jesus Christ. Some of people who've gone through persecution, you get to see how strong faith they have, because they've seen goodness of God and how God uses those opportunities to bring people more close to himself. And also I was reminded today that whatever happened, how much US was not waiting such a thing, or Western countries were not expecting such a thing. Lord Jesus Christ is not surprised on what's happening in Afghanistan. He's not shocked by it, and he promises that he will be with them. So our brothers and sisters are confident that God does take care of them, and he will take care of them. We do pray for
Amen.
their faith, as well as we do pray for their practical needs. On the topic of practical needs, I am aware that I brought that up other day on Barnabas. We can use Barnabas Fund after prayerfully consider if Lord wants us to support our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan. You can go to Barnabas Fund's website and financially give, as well as let me put this on the screen as well.
Open door.
Yeah, but I'm just gonna bring different thing to attention. So this is another website. So it is, oh, sorry. Sorry. So this is Catalytic Ministries. They are focused on discipleship and equipping leaders. They can make use of the resources we have here to look after our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, because winter is coming. Yes, it's August in some part of the world. It's like very nice and good. But winter is coming, and Afghanistan has very tough winter. Our brothers and sisters will have to move from one place to other place. Our brothers and sisters needs to still able to meet for fellowship, for church, and for praises and for prayer. So this ministry will help your money to get into the right places to look after our brothers and sisters, or support our brothers and sisters in time of difficulties. So what I'll do is I'll put the link in the group, in the chat. So for if anyone wants to kind of give, but it is important that as a Christian we are responsible for the resources Lord is giving to us. Therefore, please, just because I put the link in the chat, don't just like, oh, I feel sorry for my brother, let me give them money, that will make me feel better. They don't need our pity. They need our hearts. So do prayerfully consider if Lord is leading you to support our brothers and sisters in financial terms. This is another helpful group who can help us simply to support our brothers and sisters. So I'll put the link in the chat, and please kind of prayerfully consider and do something about it if that's the way, like, kind of Lord is guiding you. Sorry, I put the wrong link. I'll put the right link. But as I said, like,
Mods are also sharing links as well. Sorry to interrupt, but the mods are also sharing the links as well.
Yeah,
So.
thank you. Thank you. So we can't just like move people when our brothers and sisters prayerfully considered, and then they said, yes, life is going to be hard, but Lord Jesus Christ is worthy for them. Of course, anyway, it's always very easy to just comment on the life of a persecuted brother and sister. It's always very easy, but let's prayerfully consider even our response, not only our giving, not only our prayer life for our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, but also our response to decisions which has been prayerfully considered, and people are willing to put their life on it, in the sense, we want to stay here because there will be opportunities. There will be opportunities for us to preach the gospel. So please, just be wise on that. Be wise on that. Anything you want to add, sister, or anything else you want to bring up?
Yeah. I wanted to say, first of all, about the Christians that are still there. A lot of them, there's a time that we look at, that's more publicized about the 60s and earlier 70s in Afghanistan, and it being this time of progress, but rarely, not as often, do we see the footage or imagery of, let's say, 1950s Afghanistan before, let's say, the Soviet the Soviet occupation, et cetera, before it went into that arena, before, but still after World War II. And so at that point, like, this is not the first time that the U.S., for instance, or the West has gone into Afghanistan. And it hasn't always been this sort of negative in instituting puppet governments and occupation, sort of the way that it's viewed. It was a time in the 1950s where you had, like I'd mentioned before, there was a Shah that really wanted to expand and help to build the infrastructure within the country to provide a an actual way to expand to actually become a more cohesive nation, if you will. And so this is when they had different different surveys being done, coming in, surveying the land, processes, ways to do so they had this. There was this company from the West it's called Morrison Knudsen that came to Afghanistan in the 1950s, and they actually brought a way to utilize hydro power plants, and they created that, and they worked together, and there was people there that, it was a much more safer environment before any of this came on, before the destructions that come with conflict and everything else. So that's why you have some of these Christians that they remember those times, or they know those times where, yes, they could have a different ideology fundamentally and everything else, but there was a time, and there are Afghans still that are not so militant in their Sharia or their adherence to Sharia, or not so, they're not all so militia minded. There are ones that, are willing to listen and want to hear, and that's what these Christians within Afghanistan, they want to continue to carry that mantle, and they want to be there, because if they are not there, who else is going to share the gospel with these people,
When we, as a Christian, we do acknowledge that, yes, the world has different response to the ideologies, but biblical response to the every ideology is Lord Jesus Christ. You can kill people, you can get rid of people, you can put people in prison, but their ideology will stay. Someone new will come and take over that ideology and then develop it. So ideologies can be destroyed only by our God, by his glorious gospel. So, like, we need to figure out the ways which Lord puts in front of us, and faithfully follow those instructions, and make the opportunities to preach the gospel, because there is no solution, there is no any other way for the world to be a better place unless people turn to Lord Jesus Christ. And that is very serious. It should break our hearts that even Muslims are running away from Muslim groups. Yet there is something in the hearts and minds of Christians. They see the heart of God for the people of Afghanistan, and they want to stay to make the opportunities to talk about gospel. So that should, in a sense, make us to think through, where do we stand? Where do we stand when it comes to preaching the gospel, like in very comfortable life here in UK or in US, but also preaching the gospel under the persecution. So that's like different level
also,
of faith.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that you see, like, when you have from, Muslim majority countries, they have an organization, right? The Organization of Islamic cooperation, and they are they're the second largest outside of like the United Nations organization in the world. So they're all in this council. They all come together in the name of being quote unquote Muslim countries, right? And so they have a consensus, but the unfortunate thing is when, and they, of course, there's also the proxy, I would call shadow EU. That's the European Muslim Union as well. That doesn't help. That's another organization. And so and also the media influence and everything else from all the different Arab media groups that definitely have a lot of influence as well. So, but what you're looking at here is you're looking at the fact that these people see the U.S., they see the West, the U.K. as these Christian nations, right? Whether they're acting that way or not. And it's unfortunate because one of the things that's used often, and unfortunate for the U.S. military, is we're living in a time where the U.S. military is more concerned with showing that they want to uphold trans in the military, as opposed to showing themselves as a strong military group within the world on a global stage. And the reason why this is important and why this is linked to Taliban taking over in Afghanistan and the legalization and validation of terrorism as a governing state is because when you have, this is the reason why the US is in this position is because of its power. And this is why the international currency is anchored by the dollar, by the US dollar. But the reason why it's such a big win for the Taliban and for jihad terrorism period is because they're now going to look at the U.S. in this weakened state that they can't even say, hey, we can't even secure the dollar, because the reason why they are able to do that is because of their military. But if their military can't stand up to the Taliban, and their military can't be reckoned with and stand up to the whole push for transgender in the military services and ranks, then how are they going to stand up for what's righteous and what are Western quote unquote liberal values? So they're definitely in a majorly weakened state. This is we're definitely living in a time where things are definitely going to change, and this is the time where people have to stand up. If something is happening, don't just nod your head. Nobody's saying you put yourself in any certain risk, but don't be afraid to be listed as this or this or that, because you don't want to say that you disagree with these different things that are happening. Because if you're not the one speaking, then you get taken over, and these kind of things happen quickly. And don't be surprised if this type of stuff on its own level and if it's in its own way happens in your more local arena, because it definitely does. So there's a lot of things to think about here, but it's beyond Afghanistan, it's beyond the Taliban, and I really hope that people understand, how the implications of this and what the domino effect is going to be going forward. And I hope that everybody has their eyes open and is able to stand up and say, no, I disagree, or that's not okay. And if you're Christian, then stand up for Christians. That's a very simple thing you can do in any way, on any level. But the big thing is to remember is in the meantime, there is the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, second only, like I said, remember, to the UN, to the United Nations. So they're a huge force to be reckoned with. I mean, the I guess the good part, if you will, is the fact that they're often, at different, they're often on different sides and everything else, and they have their own interconflicts there as well. But yeah, a lot of that whole idea of like, okay, like the idea of things being black and white, like it's just not like that. It just really isn't. So many nuances.
Thank you very much for that, and also thank you very much for helping us to think through and sharing this video with us for the origin of Taliban. And we also talked about like what is the implication of that to our brothers and sisters as well as people of Afghanistan. So really appreciate your time, sister, and also really appreciate for everyone who joined us in the chat. Thank you very much for that. What I'll do is, it's not kind of something we usually do, but since we talked about our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, if that's okay, if that's not something you prefer, this is good time for you to kind of leave us. But what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna read scripture for us. Romans chapter 8, and then after that I will put a worship song on, and then we will finish the evening from there. Before that, before we close up, sister, have you got your last kind of words that you want to share with us?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I do have like that Discord server where there's a lot of information, and we're more on the let's say on the geopolitical side and figuring things out that way. But I'll definitely post that link if anybody wants to join. And beyond that, just people standing up for what's right, realizing that, for instance, it doesn't bode well when we're trying to be an influence collectively as nations to say, for instance, a nation like Afghanistan, why, the reason why something like the Taliban holds any weight is because it went beyond just women's rights. Of course, we all agree to that, but it went to putting in U.S. dollars to promoting LGBTQIA plus and whatever else the letters are, and these things are obviously not going to gel well and sit well with the vast majority of Muslim sensibilities, particularly the Afghans. And so we need to be able to think critically and clearly and say, yeah, there comes a point, I feel very sorry for these people that are, transgender, and they're obviously living with a mental illness, having gender dysphoria, and it's very difficult, and we should definitely be kind and show them the love of Christ, indeed. But there comes a point where, for the protection of future generations and of our children that we're beholden to protect, that we stand up and we don't allow things like, let's see, what's it called, where you have these absolutely depraved story hours, where you have men in dresses confusing children with sometimes their genitals exposed, and that this is at all allowed. We have to be able to be clearly to stand up and say, no, this is not okay. This is not okay. And we have to make our voices heard on whatever level or way that we can. And we have to be the example. We can't say, like, listen to us while we also stand in a line with depravity. That's just hypocrisy, and that's not respected. Even ones that oppose us won't respect that either. So that's the main thing that I'll add. And I just want to say thank you, Hatun, for inviting me here and for allowing me the opportunity to share and giving people a little bit of a better idea, a broader idea of more expand on the fact of who the Taliban is and how they came about. And you need to know these organizations and these people to know what you're dealing with going forward, and to be able to, and to know how to reconcile these facts and how to proceed. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sister. Thank you very much. Romans chapter 8. I'll pick up from verse 31. Please, in your time, you do read it. What then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who is he that condemns? Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of the God, and is also interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. we are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, neither angels, nor demons, neither present or the future, nor any powers, neither height or depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And we will finish with the worship song, and we will see you tomorrow evening for Open Skype. God bless you all.
Lord, I will lift up my song. I will praise your name. I will praise your name. When times of need carry on, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. Though darkness falls all around, I will praise your name. I will praise your name. If I forget what I found, I will praise your name. I will praise your name.